Part 2. Here's the example. Thus, in a brazen urn, the water's light, trembling, reflects the sun's and moon's rays, and, darting here and there in aimless flight, rises aloft and on the ceiling plays. Virgil. So Montaigne's writing the first essays, right? And he's not really like that skilled at introducing quotes. He just sort of, boom, drops them in the middle of his essay. But he's giving an analogy here, a comparison, another one besides the fields and the women. All right. Thus, in a brazen urn, like, I don't know, in like a dish or something, or in like a vase, the water's light trembles and reflects the sun's and moon's bright rays, and it darts here and there. It goes all over the place in aimless flight. It rises aloft and on the ceiling plays. So this is kind of like saying the same thing that Montaigne did. He's like giving an example. If you put water in an urn and light shines on it, like you've seen this happen, guys, the water is going to like reflect all over the walls and bounce all over the ceiling, like imagination would in a mind. He gives another example from Horace and then another one from Martial. Horace, or he says first, Montaigne does, and there is no mad or idle fancy that they do not bring forth in this agitation. So a fancy is just like another way of saying imagination, okay? There is no mad, like crazy, or idle fancy. Remember, idle is not doing much, like just letting yourself wander, that they do not bring forth in this agitation. So there's not a single crazy or like lazy or whatever thought that doesn't come into the mind if it's just left on its own. Like a sick man's dreams, they form vain visions. So just like a crazy man or like a mentally ill man would have these basically mentally ill dreams, they form vain visions. So these thoughts that are allowed to bounce all over the place, they form vain visions. Vain in this sense would probably mean useless, right? Useless or thoughts not worth thinking. Okay. The soul that has no fixed goal loses itself, just like the mind. The soul, if it's allowed to just do whatever it wants, it loses itself, it gets lost. For, as they say, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. So just like the imagination being allowed to bound hither and yon all over the place, just like the water, just like dreams, if they're allowed to bound all over the place, they actually go nowhere, right? And Montaigne gives another example. He who dwells everywhere, Maximus, nowhere dwells. So Montaigne, in giving that example, is like, don't just listen to me, listen to Martial as well. Okay, I'm almost done. This is Montaigne now. Lately, when I retired to my home, determined so far as possible to bother about nothing except spending the little life I have left in rest and seclusion, it seemed to me I could do my mind no greater favor than to let it entertain itself in full idleness and stay and settle in itself, which I hoped it might do more easily now, having become weightier and riper with time. So he's saying, lately when I retired to my home, I went home to relax. You know what? I decided I didn't want to bother about anything except spending the little life I have left, the little rest of the day that I have, the little amount of my own life that I have left in rest and seclusion. I thought to myself, you know what? I could do my mind no greater favor. Like, I couldn't do anything better for my mind than let it entertain itself and just let it bound all over the place, like he was talking over here. Like, wouldn't that be great? Shouldn't you do that? Just let your imagination go all over. Which it might do more easily now, having become weightier and riper with time. So as you get older, your mind gets more and more tired, right? He says, that might have been good for me to do when I came home, to just let my mind rest. Maybe in our day, we might say watch TV, like mess around on the internet. He says, but like I thought that was a good idea, to let my mind do whatever it wants. But I find. And then he gives another example. Someone else, he brings in a quote. Ever idle hours breed wandering thoughts. So ever idle hours. Hours that are always idle, always aimless, they have no goal, you are doing nothing with your time, breed wandering thoughts. They give way to your thoughts wandering and going all over the place. Montaigne doesn't seem to think that this is good. You should be getting that by now. Montaigne thinks that you should have something to do with your time, something to do with your thoughts, and if not, you form vain visions. Your thoughts play all over the ceiling, and your soul, your mind can lose themselves. You can go mad, right? Okay, so I'm back on 25. So, coming home, I thought to let my mind rest, and then I decided, you know what? That would lead to wandering thoughts. That, on the contrary, like a runaway horse, it gives itself 100 times more trouble than it took for in others. So if you let your mind turn around like a runaway horse, it gives itself 100 times more trouble than it took for others, and gives birth to so many chimeras and fantastic monsters, one after another, without order or purpose, that in order to contemplate their ineptitude and strangeness at my pleasure, I have begun to put them in writing, hoping in time to make my mind ashamed of itself. This is interesting. So, on the contrary, if I let my mind be like a runaway horse, it gives birth to, like I'm having you guys look up fallow. I'm going to have you look up chimeras, or chimeras. I've heard it pronounced different ways. And fantastic monsters, one after another. So my mind doesn't go to good places if I just let it do whatever it wants, actually. Like it comes up with these monsters, right? Maybe worry, maybe unnecessary worry, like unnecessary worry about money troubles, perhaps. One after another, without order or purpose. So my mind is all disorderly. It's got no purpose. That in order to contemplate their ineptitude, like the ineptitude of these monsters, these thoughts, ineptitude is just like inability to do anything well, to do anything right. And strangeness at my pleasure, I've begun to put them in writing, hoping in time to make my mind ashamed of itself. So he said, in order actually to try to figure out like why my mind goes to these places, and in order to make my mind ashamed of itself, that it gets so idle, I've actually decided to put these ideas in writing. I write turn over here. When I first read this essay, I wrote turn. Oops, one hand, not easy. Because he takes a turn. I thought he was going to say, it is bad for a mind to be idle. Don't let your mind wander idly, which he does. But he's wound up saying, rather than ignoring these thoughts or not letting his mind turn idle, at his own pleasure, he's decided to write the thoughts down. But then he's still ashamed of the thoughts, hoping in time to make my mind ashamed of itself. So, in summary, idleness is, according to Montaigne, it is, I'll turn the camera to myself. Idleness is like not great. He's ashamed of his own idleness. He's ashamed that his mind gets idle. It gets slow. It doesn't go anywhere. But at the end of the day, it's kind of fascinating too. And for his own pleasure, he'll write down all of these like crazy thoughts, these monstrous thoughts that he has in order to make his mind ashamed of itself later, in order to shame himself out of like having the thoughts. Kind of like you would write in your diary, I spent too much time on the internet today, in order to shame yourself for spending too much time on the internet. So that's of idleness. Remember, for your summary micro theme, you're picking one of these 3 essays of Montaigne's. Of sadness, that intention is judge of our actions, meaning like that as long as we mean well, that's the judge of what we do, and that's okay. And of idleness. You're picking one of those, but you're actually going to summarize in one sentence all 3. And then in part 2 of your thesis support micro theme, remember, you're going to choose an essay, say whether or not you agree with its main point, and then give some examples for why, preferably 2 or 3. And that's due on Tuesday. I hope that the video was helpful and not too long. It was definitely longer than I wanted or expected it to be. But yeah, hopefully it was helpful, and you guys have a wonderful weekend. Feel free to leave me comments about the video. What is still confusing to you? What is now clear to you that wasn't clear before? All those are helpful. Take care, guys. Bye.